The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, X-Zone Radio TV. He related events both from his own collections as well as he himself had been told by his associate, Stewart Menzies, who was the head of MI6, which is military intelligence, during World War II. Menzies had daily meetings with Churchill, and our guest, Eddie Upnick, made a promise to Sidney Dowse that he would not repeat anything he had revealed to him until after his death. Mr. Dowse died in 2008. Joining me now is my guest this hour, Eddie Upnick. And Eddie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. Glad to be here.
Eddie, give us a little bit of background about yourself before we go on.
Okay, I was a joke writer in the 1970s. I wrote for Rodney Dangerfield, among others.
Wow.
I was a ghostwriter for situation comedies. If some writers for different TV shows couldn't make their quota of 4 or 6 episodes, they'd call me and I'd write an episode for them under their name. I invented a game in 1984 called Super Chess, which was played in 37 countries and was a Games Magazine Game of the Year. And aside from that, I've basically been working, in various creative fields of writing and joke writing and helping other writers, that sort of thing.
Tell me, what was it like when you first encountered Sidney Dowse?
It was really an unusual encounter because I didn't expect anything to happen. We were on vacation in Antigua at a sandals resort with another couple. My wife and I were with another couple. And seated opposite from us was Sidney Dowse and his wife Penelope. And after sitting there for a minute, The Great Escape was one of my favorite movies of all time. And after Penelope Dowse said, well, my husband, he was one of the men who escaped from that camp.
Wow.
And as soon as she said that, I turned to my wife, I said, you're not going to see me for the next 5 days. I'm going to be following this man around and try to get some stories out of him. And for the first 3 days, he wouldn't tell me anything. His wife kept saying, he never talks about the war. He never goes there, So I took that as a challenge, and I just stayed on him. And finally, as I was about to give up on the third night, we were sitting at a bar around 11 o'clock at night, and he turns to me and he said, if I talk to you, you have to make me 2 promises. One is that you won't reveal anything that I'm telling you until after my death, and the other is that you will put this in the form of a novel. I don't want it like a documentary. He said, I want it so people can believe it, or they don't have to believe it, and if it's in a novel, they don't have to believe it. I said, no problem.
Sure.
And then he went on to tell me things that were not in any history book. Many of the stories were about the camp itself, but most of the stories that triggered the writing of these books were from before the war started. He worked for Stewart Menzies in secret operations. And the story that triggered the writing of Time Will Tell was, he said, 2 men came into British Command headquarters in July of 1939.
All right, Stan, okay, you and I have to take a commercial break here. I'm sorry you don't have the script in front of you. We have to take our 2-minute break, and we'll be right back. Interesting hour, X-Zone Nation. Eddie Upnick is our guest for this hour. www.eddieupnick.com. That's EDDIEUPNICK.com. And we'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits, and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, Old Florida cuisine at its best. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
We all desire health, happiness, and fulfillment, but often get in our own way. Repeated patterns that leave us out of control can keep us feeling powerless, frustrated, and unable to move forward in spite of our best efforts. Unconscious patterning disconnects us from our gifts, often destroying the very thing we seek. But there is an answer. We can take charge of our destiny and heal the trauma of our history. Shamanism is an effective ancient modality that can reconnect us with our true selves, empower the creation of our dreams, and return us to health and balance. Cody Alexander is a certified shamanic practitioner and teacher with 11 years' experience. Email healingpathways33@gmail.com or visit codyalexander.net to schedule a long-distance shamanic session today.
My guest this hour is Eddie Upnick. His website is www.eddieupnick.com, and he's the author of Time Will Tell, Future Tense, and 2052. We were talking about how you met Sidney Dowse and you know how he intrigued you, being that he was part of the Great Escape, the real Great Escape that was portrayed in the 1963 movie. But I understand that he was part of military intelligence, and am I correct in reading that time travelers actually helped the Allies in July of 1939?
Well, that was the story that triggered the writing of Time Will Tell. When Sidney told me this story, I got goosebumps. I believed him. He was not the type of man that BS very much. He really very straight shooting. And when he told me that two men came into British Command headquarters in July of 1939, this was Stewart Menzies telling Sidney the story. Sidney was not there.
Right.
These two men came into British Command headquarters carrying handheld devices of some kind. And they said they'd like to help the British break the German Enigma codes, which were the codes that were used for German commanders in the field to be issued orders by the German High Command. And if the English knew those orders at the same time the German officers in the field were getting them, they'd have quite an advantage. And the other thing these two men wanted to do was improve the fledgling British radar system, which in 15 minutes they were able to do using these handheld devices. They improved the British radar system by a 75-mile radius, and they handed them the code keys to the German Enigma codes and how to break the German code. And Menzies was looking at these men and he said, "Are you German defectors?" And one of the men just walked out the door, and the second man turned in the doorway and said to him, "No, we're not German defectors. We're just here to make sure a certain future doesn't happen."
Okay.
So when Sidney told me this story, I said, well, who do you think these guys were? Do you think they were time travelers who came back to make sure the Allies won World War II? And Sidney, with no sense of humor, he just turned to me and he said, "That's not the first time I've considered that possibility." So that really triggered the writing of Time Will Tell.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. If these were, in fact, time travelers, and I wasn't there, so I really don't know if they were or not, would they have not given the British much more information than just the Enigma code or the increasing the radar? How do we know that this really happened?
Well, the other thing that they did hand Menzies as they were leaving was a piece of paper with 19 names on it. And they said these are 19 German spies working in MI6. And Menzies looked at the list, had the men followed for about 2 weeks, realized that this list was genuine, and those 19 agents were shot before the war started. So, how are they time travelers? I mean, this is what Sidney Dowse believed. I mean, it's a fantastic story, but a handheld device in 1939. I mean, we didn't have PDAs until the late 90s at the earliest. So, there were a lot of pieces of this that just came together in an interesting way. I mean, Sidney told me other stories. He told me that Winston Churchill knew about the Pearl Harbor attack 2 weeks before it was to take place because they did break the Japanese codes, and they knew that the attack was coming. And one of the chapters in Time Will Tell is called Churchill's Dilemma, because he knew of the exact date of the attack, but he didn't know how to handle it, because he was desperate to get the United States into World War II, but he figured if he told FDR the exact date and time of the attack, the Americans would somehow stop it, and they wouldn't enter the war. So he said Churchill was for 3 days sitting alone in a room trying to figure out how to handle this. And the compromise, according to Sidney Dowse, was that Churchill came up with was he called Roosevelt and he told him, "Listen, get your 4 aircraft carriers out of Pearl Harbor between December 1st and December 14th. He said, put them on maneuvers, do whatever you have to do, just get them out of there." And when FDR asked him why, Churchill said, "Please don't ask, just do it." And the 4 aircraft carriers were on maneuvers and not in Pearl Harbor when the attack happened. So, that was fascinating to me. And the other interesting part of the end of that story was after December 7th, Churchill was fully expecting the United States to declare war on Germany as well as Japan. But we didn't. We only declared war on Japan. So Churchill was absolutely freaking out. This is how Sidney put it to me.
Right.
That, we were going to attack Japan, but, Germany was safe for the moment. And thank goodness there's a date in history that is not very well known. But December 11th was really the key to the war, because that's the date that Hitler declared war on the United States.
Okay, let me understand this. I'm just trying to put a timeline together in my mind. These 2 time travelers went back in 1939. Do we know when in 1939 they went? In what month it was?
It was in July. All I know is it was July of 1939 that they walked into British Command headquarters.
All right, because it was July the 26th and 27th during a conference that the British claimed that they had broken the Enigma code.
Well, it's certainly the timing is right, because if it was a few days before that, or even a few weeks before that in July, that does make sense. I don't know the exact date in July. He just said July of 1939. It's just food for thought, and it's certainly, it's plausible in a way, because if there ever were time travelers, you would think World War II would be a focal point in history.
Or if there were time travelers, they'd also give us insight to many other things that are boggling us at this time in our society. For example, cancer, what we could do for global warming, and so on and so forth. Why is it that they only gave the information pertaining to the Enigma code and these 19 agents?
Well, this was all that Sidney Dowse was aware of. Okay, who knows what other things if these time travelers have come back from time to time and worked here or there and tried to help society evolve. I mean, basically, my 3 books sort of postulate on this. what you're saying, and I come up with my own, versions of what might have happened based on some other factors involved. But this was really what triggered the writing of the book. I mean, this story in itself, and Amy's telling me that Neville Chamberlain was not the fool that history portrayed him to be. He was just buying time for England to prepare for war.
Right.
And he just played the fool. And he said that really bothered Sidney, and it bothered Churchill, that Neville Chamberlain took the heat for everything as the complete buffoon, the peace in our time speech and all that, and it was just strictly to buy more time for England to complete some of their war projects.
Do you think that time travelers are still interacting with the powers to be?
I have no idea. I mean, it's you'd have to hope so if we need them. I would imagine they would wait for a near catastrophe to happen before they get involved. But
look what happened with the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They were pretty devastating. Then we had the twin towers. That was very devastating. How come nobody intervened with that?
They're great questions, and there's more questions than there are answers.
Yeah.
But it's you would think that many things would just have to play out naturally, and other things that were very, very serious and could change the course of history.
But what was it? What was it with this gentleman, Mr. Dowse, that made you believe him?
Well, the fact that he wouldn't even talk to me for 3 days. His wife telling me he never talked about the war. He hadn't spoken about the war in 50 years, according to her. And I had just given up. I wasn't even, and then when he saw that I, looked a little despondent, I was depressed that he wouldn't talk about anything. He, that's when he turned to me and said, "Look, you got to make me these 2 promises, and I will talk to you." And I've always believed that there are certain people in history that are there when certain major things happen, and they know what really went down, and history is sometimes recorded differently to protect the public. And I truly believe that fact. In fact, I grew up with a couple of friends of mine who went into black ops. One of them was assigned to Area 51. One of them was, working on Homeland Security. And the Homeland Security friend was telling me, back on 9/11. Right after that, there was, in New York, there's a bridge called the Throgs Neck Bridge, and he was telling me that they had dynamited this bridge, that the extremists had dynamited the bridge, and they were 3 minutes away from exploding the Throgs Neck Bridge with hundreds of cars traveling over it, and they were able to disable the dynamite in the C4 just in time. And this was never recorded, because they buried it. It never, it was never written about. So in that sense, people that are there at the time that history actually happens have control of the situation. If they have tight tongues and they don't want to talk about these things, they just disappear. And at that time, America didn't need another, major threat coming from the extremists after we lost all the 3,000 people on 9/11. So they decided to bury the story and, not give them any more press.
You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. Eddie Upnick is our guest, X-Zone Nation. His website is www.eddieupnick.com. That's EDDIEUPNICK.com. And Eddie's the author of, do you have your pencils and paper ready? Okay. Time Will Tell, Future Tense, and 2052. We'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X-Zone from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
There's a legend shared by many indigenous cultures of a time when the nations were cast to the four corners of the world. Each nation was given a body of sacred knowledge that held a different portion of the truth to preserve. True reality could not be known until all the nations reunited, combining the information. If a single one was missing, the world could not be reborn and darkness would prevail. The Science of Magic Radio is dedicated to reuniting this sacred knowledge. With the understanding, none of us has all the answers, but together we can open new perceptions and possibilities. Through our combined vision, the world can be reborn into a place where darkness no longer prevails. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic daily on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, or visit us at thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome back, everyone. Eddie Upnick is our guest. His website is www.eddieupnick.com. That's www.eddieupnick.com. And Eddie is the author of Time Will Tell, Future Tense and 2052. Eddie, in your book, in your second book in the trilogy Future Tense, you postulated what would happen in Russia if Vladimir Putin were killed.
Yeah, in fact, I have a funny story to tell about this. I live in New York, so I decided to take a copy of Future Tense, which postulates, as you said, if Putin were killed, what would happen in Russia? And my CIA buddies were telling me that, in their opinion, Russia would turn into a sort of a mafia state where the mob would be running Russia, and it would become dangerous because they could be selling, nuclear weapons to rogue states, to the highest bidder, that sort of thing. So honestly, they think, Russia's safer with a Putin in charge than they would be if they had no strong figurehead in the government and the mob was able to run free. Anyway, I go to the Russian consulate in New York with a copy of Future Tense.
Right.
And I drop it off, with some big burly guy at the door. He takes it. What is this book? I go, well, read the book. It's interesting. It's about what would happen in Russia if Putin is killed. He goes, you know who's going to kill Putin? I said, no. It takes place in the future. I'm trying to explain to this man. 3 days later, I get a phone call. Might have been from the same guy, had the same accent. And he's going, we want the name of the man that's going to kill Mr. Putin. I said, you don't understand. It's a novel. It takes place in the future. It's not. It hasn't happened. They just couldn't get over the concept that I didn't actually know the name of the man that was going to try to kill Vladimir Putin in the next 5 years.
Unreal.
It was actually pretty funny. But
you also talk in your final book of the trilogy 2052 about some fascinating conclusions as to who the Atlanteans were, and I'd like to hear those.
Well, I was an anthropology major in college, and I went on a number of archaeology digs.
Right.
And my archaeology professor, who I thought was brilliant, in 1952, he found something that was just amazing, and I sort of postulate on what he found and what he believed. He found a piece of leather with 4 steel studs in the corners, and he was 6,000 feet down in a ravine in Spain when he found this thing. And he had it carbon dated, and the leather was 15,000 years old. He's looking at me. He says, the problem, he says, is, metal work wasn't done at the earliest until 2000 BC. So how could this thing with metal studs in it be from 15,000 BC? Obviously the Iron Age, we got that wrong, or this is, somebody went back in time with advanced technology, and he really believed this, and the rest of the people in the department thought he was a little wacky because he couldn't prove anything.
Right.
And I sort of ran with this story a little bit because he was firmly in the belief. He took it to a number of places to see if they felt that these 4 metal studs were added later, or if they were put in at the same time as the piece of leather. They really couldn't tell. They couldn't give him an answer one way or the other. But he was convinced he found something that, proved that the Atlanteans were from the future. And they actually went back to the past, and they were the ones that created this piece of leather with steel studs in it for whatever reason. And in 2052, I postulate what that could have been at the end of the book. But it's, I call my books reality-based science fiction.
Well, that's
because
unique.
They're all based in a reality, and they have a lot of truth in them, but they're clearly science fiction.
All right, so let me understand this. The Atlanteans were space travelers or time travelers?
No, he thought they were time travelers. He thought they were people from, let's say, 50 years from now to 500 years from now, who went back in time for whatever reason, and created their own society on these islands, which they called Atlantis.
Well, then, based on the trilogy that you've written, who are the extraterrestrials that people keep talking about, and are UFOs real?
Well, my friend who works at Area 51, I'd have to get him drunk, and he might release one statement to me per year, kind of thing. But over the course of the last 30 years, he's told me a few things. He told me there are various spaceships at Area 51. He personally hasn't seen any aliens, but he said the members of the Air Force fly these things. And that could be the UFOs that people have been seeing. Our Air Force personnel are flying around with these things.
Is it possible what the Air Force personnel are flying around in are actually experimental craft from good old terra firma here?
Well, that's the more logical, down-to-earth, non-UFO believing theory for sure.
Sober one too.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know. It's like anything else. It's trying to figure out a puzzle when you have 20% of it.
Yeah, just like right now in the UFO community, there's quite a battle going on, because now top ufologists are coming out and saying, "Listen, we were wrong about Roswell, New Mexico. It wasn't anything to do with UFOs, and there never were any ETs or aliens there." So this is really throwing a pipe wrench into all the believers that ET did call home.
Well, actually, my friend did believe that Roswell was real. So let's go back. The pendulum's let it swing the other way on this. He felt, that they did find 4 dead aliens at Roswell. They did a very poor job of covering it up. They flew these aliens to the 8th Air Force Base in Texas, where they underwent autopsies. And that's where they made a deal, according to him, with certain aliens back in 1947 to get the bodies back. They would help us with certain technology. And maybe they left a few of their aircraft behind. It's trying to figure out the puzzle with only 20% of it, 20 or 25% of the puzzle.
Either that or it could be the Santa Claus syndrome.
I'm not familiar with that one.
No, that's where you create a myth, and because the myth is so strange, so bizarre, that it has to be real, and we all know that Santa Claus isn't real. So I've been doing this show now for 20 years, and I have never seen any evidence whatsoever to corroborate any claims of extraterrestrials or aliens, and I find it very hard to understand how these claims are being made without any evidence. Well,
I'd love to interview our astronauts who saw UFOs while they were in orbit.
Well, you see, there's something else.
To keep quiet.
Not all astronauts have made that statement. You've got Edgar Mitchell, who's a bit of a loony bin. You've got Buzz Aldrin. You've got those who for some reason, maybe it's because they're out of their 15 minutes of fame and they'll say anything just to get back in. And what does that tell us about an astronaut or a member of the military who takes a secrecy oath and then they decide to break it? What does that tell us about their character?
Well, they just told Buzz Aldrin to be quiet about it and not to talk about it in public.
Well, Buzz
Aldrin got back home.
But once again, how do we know what really went on? How, like you're talking about guys who did something great, and then all of a sudden they're on the back burner. So if it takes a bunch of UFO loonies to give them the little bit of attention that they need by saying, you know what, we saw something up there, and frankly, it was UFO. Of course it was UFO. They didn't know what the hell it was.
Yeah, it's hard to argue, either side of this argument, because if 25 years from now something comes out that proves that Buzz Aldrin was correct, that he saw something.
Hey, good for him. Hats off.
Right, that all the chastising he's been taking for it, will disappear. But will that ever happen? Who knows?
It's just like these people who see these UFOs. You get people who are in a place that are surrounded with other people. Why doesn't everyone see the UFO? Why is it only certain people that see these UFOs? Why is it so impossible to believe that the government of the United States has developed an experimental craft that can do these things? Let's go back to the very first war over in the Middle East. What was it? What was the first one? Desert Fox? No.
The Six-Day War?
No, the Desert Storm was the first one, right?
Oh, you're talking about the American involvement. Yeah, 91.
Right. Yeah. You had a bunch of loony bins going out to the fringe areas of Area 51 with Doppler radar systems, and they were seeing these aircraft doing fantastic things, and then they'd see the lights in the sky but wouldn't get a radar return. Turned out to be the F-117 Stealth going through its final maneuvers before it went over to Iraq.
That's true.
So, what do? Do you take the word of a bunch of people who really don't know what the hell they're talking about? Or do you take the word of people who may know what they're talking about? Or do you just say, hey, show me the evidence and let me make my own conclusion?
Well, showing the evidence is the best way to try to get a provable fact.
Sure. Well, look at you've got ghosts, you've got Bigfoot, you've got the Loch Ness Monster. If anything, the internet, which I call the biggest septic tank receptacle that mankind has ever created, has been the forum and the way of dispersing all this information about the paranormal that no one can prove. It's a good story. And we all know for a fact, and you know this being in the media yourself, that when television shows come on let's go back to the 90s when the X-Files first came on. My Lord, there was a spike in every type of paranormal activity that you can imagine. If it was on the X-Files, man, next week, the week following, or even that night, there were massive sightings.
This is true. That did happen while the X-Files were hot. That's for sure.
Independence Day. UFO sightings went up. Close encounters of a third kind, alien encounters went up. So you go throughout history, and whenever there's a spike, look to see what's happening around it. I don't know. When it comes to UFOs, I don't believe in them. I really don't. I really don't. I have never seen any proof. I've never talked to any guest on this show that has been able to give me enough of a story that would make me believe. And then when you've got people like Kevin Randall, who was a staunch supporter of Roswell, and others saying, you know what? We made a mistake. It wasn't a UFO craft. It was terrestrial. You say, whoa, wait a minute. Why are these guys doing backpedaling? Because they're saying, hey, we were wrong. It's that simple. And yet you've got
maybe they're being paid to change their story.
No, they're not. No, they're not. If ever there's a conspiracy, the conspiracy is not being perpetrated by the government. The UFO conspiracy is being perpetrated by the UFO community, because as long as the conspiracy is in place, that is their out of having to provide evidence of the existence of their claims because the government knows about it. It's all a conspiracy. I don't buy it. I don't buy the Men in Black. I don't buy the story where people were hushed in Roswell. I don't buy Mark Brazel's story whatsoever. And the biggest part in the entire Roswell story that makes me believe it's nothing but trash is Jesse Marcel himself, because here you have the base intelligence officer who goes out to investigate something, finds the strange material that he doesn't understand what it is. And what does he do? This so-called professional soldier, he goes home, wakes up his wife and kid and shows them instead of taking the stuff right back to the Air Force Base, thus breaking the chain of evidence. Makes no sense. It makes no sense at all.
No, I see where you're coming from.
When's your next book coming out?
I think I'm stopping after 3.
Ah, come on. One more. Make it a quartet.
Well, I mean, I had a lot of fun. It took me 5 years to write these 3 books, and I think I'll get a real job.
Oh, now, isn't writing in the media a real job? I mean, working for the people?
Of course it is. It's sort of my half joke there.
What was it like working?
I can tell you one more quick story about Joseph Kennedy.
All right, why don't we do this? I'm going to take my final break, and we'll be back. And then, tell me about Joseph Kennedy, and I also want to ask you about a few of the comics that you've worked for. Does that sound okay?
Oh, that's fine.
All right, Eddie Upnick is my guest, www.eddieupnick.com. The name of Eddie's book and his trilogy is Time Will Tell, Future Tense, and 2052. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, and I will be back with Eddie Upnick on the other side of this commercial break as we continue from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Hey, you want to tell me what's on your mind? You listen to me 4 hours a night. Send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. Do you believe that the UFO legend, myth is real, or do you think it's losing its impact on the world? I'll be back. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today. www.soulbalancing.world.
Welcome back, everyone. Eddie Upnick is our special guest. His his trilogy is entitled, I should say, Time Will Tell, Future Tense, and 2052. His website, www.eddieupnick.com. And Eddie, you were going to tell us a story about Joseph Kennedy.
Yeah, one of the stories Sidney Dowse told me that is not in any of my books, but it was a fascinating story. He was working in MI6
right.
As the war was about to break out, and British intelligence followed Joseph Kennedy, who was the ambassador to England for the United States, and Joseph Kennedy had a meeting with Adolf Hitler, and they signed some kind of an agreement. And they took pictures of this, and they wanted to find out what this agreement was. So Churchill invited Joseph Kennedy to dinner, and while he was having dinner with Churchill, Sidney and Stewart Menzies and two men broke into the American embassy. They had the combination to the safe. They opened up the safe, photocopied the picture, photocopied the document, brought it back to Churchill at the end of the night after Joseph Kennedy left. And what it was an agreement between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Kennedy that when Germany wins World War II, he will be his top lieutenant in the United States. So Churchill, they looked, Sidney said, "What do you want to do with this thing?" Churchill said, "Make a copy of it and send it to Roosevelt." So they made a copy of it, they sent it to Roosevelt. As soon as Roosevelt got it, he recalled Joseph Kennedy as the ambassador to the court of St. James.
Wow.
And that was that. So that was his Joseph Kennedy story. But he said the most interesting part of the story was what Churchill said afterwards.
What was that?
Churchill said, "This family's going to be cursed for the deal that this man signed with the devil."
Wow, that is really interesting. Sounds like this gentleman, Sidney Dowse, was a wealth of information, and I guess history will thank you for taking the initiative of writing your trilogy and giving us all a glimpse into the past and into the future.
Well, my wife said to me, "You can't let these stories die with Sidney. He had no children, and they might have died if I didn't repeat them." So, to that extent, I agree, and I thank you for that.
We've got about a minute and a half left. Rodney Dangerfield, what kind of guy was he?
Just the same way in real life.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I when I first went to his club, real quick, I had a whole bunch of jokes I had written for him, and he was on stage. He came off about 12:30 a.m. He goes, "Hey, kid, you got some jokes there? Come on downstairs. Let's see what you got." So we go downstairs to his dressing room, and a minute later, Rodney's completely naked, standing sideways, looking in a mirror. And he goes, "Hey, kid, is this a body or what?" And I said, "Or what?" He goes, "You're all right, you're okay." and I started writing for him after that. I probably wrote about 50 jokes for him. Well, he was the best in the industry. He paid $50 a joke where every other comedian paid 10. So he was the person you wanted to work for.
Listen, you and I have got to say so long for today. I want to thank you so much, Eddie. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to the next time you and I meet here in the X Zone.
Rob, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
My great pleasure, sir. Take care of yourself, Eddie.
All right, bye for now.
Bye-bye. X Zone Nation, what a guy. Eddie Upnick has been my guest this hour. Once again, if you'd like to find out more about Eddie, if you'd like to get his trilogy, Time Will Tell, Future Tense, and 2052, visit his website at www.eddieupnick.com. That's www.eddieupnick.com. And I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as the X Zone continues. Where? Right here from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Let me see, the X Chronicles newspaper, July-August edition is coming out soon. And don't forget the X Zone store at www.xzonestore.com. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We're on Talkstar. Don't go away.